Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not just to learn about history, but to peel back the layers of a story you think you know. Imagine you're walking down a street, lit by glowing bulbs, scrolling through your phone that holds the power of recorded sound, or settling in for a movie night. All these everyday miracles. You probably connect them back to one name, right? Thomas Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park. He's everywhere in our cultural memory, a lone genius tinkering away in his lab, pulling groundbreaking inventions out of thin air. But what if I told you the glow of that bulb, the echo of that recorded voice, the flicker of that moving image? What if the story behind them isn't quite as simple as single as the legend suggests? You think you know the inventor, but tonight we're exploring the possibility that you might just be in love with his incredibly well-managed brand. And just between us, getting the real story might actually challenge some deeply held beliefs, so you probably won't survive this journey with your existing mental picture intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle back, the familiar weight of your pillow cradling your head, and you picture him, Thomas Edison. The name itself conjures images of sparks, flying beakers, bubbling, the quintessential American inventor, right? He's the guy on the postage, stamps the namesake of labs and schools, the personification of ingenuity and persistence, the one who famously said, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." It's drilled into you from elementary school. Edison invented the light bulb, the phonograph, the movie projector. He is invention. You see the statues, you read the simplified textbooks, and the image solidifies. A benevolent, slightly disheveled genius, tirelessly working for the betterment of mankind. It's a powerful, comforting narrative, isn't it? Like a warm blanket woven from threads of national pride and undeniable technological progress. But history, my friends, is rarely a simple tapestry. It's more like a tangled ball of yarn with competing threads, knots of controversy, and whole sections where the color faded or was deliberately dyed differently later on. And when you start tugging at the threads of the Edison story, you quickly find that the picture-perfect image begins to unravel a little, or maybe a lot. Tonight, we're going to gently tug at those threads, exploring not just the inventions themselves, but the stories around them, the claims, the counterclaims, the brilliant insights, and the surprisingly savvy marketing that turned a prolific inventor into an almost mythological figure. Think about the light bulb, for instance. It's Exhibit A in the Edison was a genius case. You can probably see it in your mind's eye right now. That pear-shaped glass, the fragile filament inside, glowing with a warm, steady light. Before this reliable indoor lighting was, well, it was a literal fire hazard, smelling faintly of whale oil or gas flickering unpredictably. The electric light bulb was a revolution, no doubt about it. It promised cleaner air, safer homes, longer working hours, streets lit up like never before. It literally changed the way the world looked and lived after sunset. And the credit for this world-altering invention almost universally goes to Thomas Edison. He's presented as the man who cracked the code, the one who, through sheer willpower and thousands of failed experiments, finally found the right filament to make it practical and long-lasting. But here's where the first hint of complexity creeps in. While Edison was indeed working feverishly on incandescent lighting in the late 1870s, pouring resources and the efforts of his team into the problem, he wasn't the only person, or even the first person, to conceive of electric light, or even an incandescent bulb. The basic principle, passing an electric current through a material to make it glow, had been known for decades. Scientists and inventors in various countries had demonstrated incandescent light long before Edison set up his lab in Menlo Park. Humphrey Davy, a British chemist, demonstrated an arc light in 1802, and while that's not the same as an incandescent bulb, it shows the idea of electric light was ancient history by Edison's time. So, if others had the idea, and even built early versions, what exactly did Edison do that earned him the title of inventor of the light bulb? Well, the common narrative says he made it practical. He found the right filament, created a good vacuum inside the bulb, and developed the whole system. The generators, the wiring, the sockets, needed to power it reliably in homes and businesses. And that systemic approach, building a complete electrical infrastructure, was undeniably a huge part of his contribution. He wasn't just inventing a bulb, he was inventing a system of illumination. But even within the bulb itself, the claim of being the sole inventor, the first to achieve a practical, long-lasting filament, that's where the historical waters get a little murky and where other names start to surface. Names that perhaps you haven't heard before. You might think, okay, maybe he wasn't the very first, but he was the one who made it work right. And that's certainly the narrative that was carefully constructed and widely disseminated. It's the narrative that stuck. It's the one that lives on in our collective memory, overshadowing the contributions of others who were just as dedicated, just as brilliant, and in some cases achieved very similar results around the same time or even earlier. This isn't about tearing down a historical figure. It's about adding detail and nuance to a portrait that has been perhaps a little too airbrushed by time and the intentional efforts of image makers. One quirky tidbit often overlooked is that Edison's initial experiments with potential filaments included platinum various metals and even human hair. Imagine the smell of burning hair in the lab. Not quite the romantic image of scientific discovery, is it? And historians still argue whether Edison truly appreciated the critical importance of a near-perfect vacuum inside the bulb from the outset, or if his understanding of that came later influenced by others' work. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, let that perfect glowing image of Edison, the lone genius, soften just a little at the edges. Prepare to explore the collaborative nature of invention, the fierce battles over intellectual property, the sheer force of personality and public relations, and the incredible range of ideas, both successful and unsuccessful, that flowed from Edison's labs. It's a story of innovation, yes, but also of business acumen, legal wrangling, and the fascinating power of shaping one's own legacy. You're settling deeper into the quiet of your room, letting the thought linger. Could the story really be that much more complicated? If Thomas Edison wasn't just a solitary figure struck by bolts of lightning genius, then who was he? And how did he manage to churn out so many groundbreaking ideas? To get closer to the answer, you have to travel back past the glowing bulbs and humming phonographs to a little village in New Jersey in the late 1870s. This is where Edison, already a successful telegraph inventor by his early 20s, a mainstream historical fact often overshadowed by the bulb, decided to do something unprecedented. He didn't just build a workshop, he built an invention factory. Think about that term for a second, factory. It conjures images of assembly lines, specialization, turning raw materials into finished products on a large scale. And that's exactly the mindset Edison brought to the notoriously unpredictable world of invention. He envisioned a place where innovation wasn't left to chance or solitary flashes of insight, but was pursued systematically, industrially, almost on demand. Menlo Park wasn't just a building, it was a concept. He gathered a diverse group of talented individuals around him: engineers, chemists, machinists, glass blowers, mathematicians. These weren't just passive assistants. They were skilled collaborators, problem solvers, the engine room of his ideas. You picture the scene: the main laboratory building, perhaps a bit chaotic, filled with strange equipment. Wires everywhere, beakers bubbling, the smell of chemicals, mixing with coal smoke from the furnace. There are workbenches cluttered with tools, notebooks filled with endless sketches and calculations. And there are people, a whole crew of them, bent over their tasks, arguing, experimenting, sometimes celebrating small victories, often facing frustrating setbacks. This wasn't a place for quiet contemplation. It was a hive of activity, buzzing with energy and purpose. You can almost hear the clatter of machinery, the murmur of voices discussing technical challenges, the sudden pop or fizzle of an experiment gone awry. This was revolutionary. At a time when most inventors worked alone, or with perhaps one or two apprentices, Edison was building a team, pooling knowledge and skills. He'd identify a problem, say how to make electric light practical, and then his team would attack it from multiple angles simultaneously. One person might be experimenting with different materials for the filament, another working on improving the vacuum pump, someone else designing the electrical system. Edison was the conductor of this orchestra, directing the research, setting the goals, and providing the funding which he cleverly secured by improving existing technologies like the stock ticker. Another early success that financed his bigger ambitions. This collaborative model is a crucial piece missing from the popular lone genius narrative. While Edison was undoubtedly brilliant, driven, and possessed of an incredible intuition for what the market needed and what was technologically feasible, he didn't perform miracles in isolation. His team members made essential contributions, developing crucial components, solving complex technical puzzles, and carrying out the thousands of experiments that were necessary. You can almost hear the gentle creak of the floorboards in the Menlo Park lab as you imagine the footsteps of men like Francis Upton, a mathematician who brought scientific rigor to the electrical experiments, or Charles Batchelor, a trusted assistant who worked alongside Edison for decades, often translating Edison's sometimes chaotic ideas into practical designs. A quirky tidbit about the Menlo Park team: they worked under intense pressure, often pulling all-nighters fueled by cigars and coffee. Edison himself was known for his stamina, supposedly needing very little sleep, and he expected similar dedication from his crew. They even had a cot in the lab for catching a few hours of rest before diving back into experiments. Imagine the kind of frantic energy, the late-night breakthroughs and frustrations happening behind those walls. It makes the 99% perspiration quote feel very, very literal. Historians still argue whether Edison was more of an inventor or a brilliant manager of inventors, and how much credit rightfully belongs to his team members for specific breakthroughs achieved at Menlo Park. Was he the sole visionary whose team merely executed his precise instructions? Or were they vital creative contributors without whom many inventions wouldn't have materialized at least not in the form they did. It's a complex question, adding another layer to the picture beyond the simple narrative you've been given. So, as you picture Menlo Park, don't just see one man in a lab coat. See a buzzing hub of activity, a pioneering example of organized research and development. See a team of bright minds working together, driven by Edison's vision and relentless energy. It's this collective effort, this invention factory model, that allowed Edison to pursue multiple projects simultaneously and accelerate the pace of innovation far beyond what a single inventor could achieve alone. And it's this organized power that he would later wield to establish his dominance in various fields, including, crucially, the burgeoning world of electric lighting. So picture that bustling invention factory at Menlo Park, that hive of activity we just explored. While they were dabbling in all sorts of ideas, improving the telephone, working on early recording devices, one problem loomed large, a challenge that promised not just scientific glory, but unimaginable wealth and impact: practical electric lighting. You might remember gaslight from old movies. Hissing lamps, flickering flames, a constant worry about leaks and fires. Arc lights existed too. There's your mainstream historical fact right there. Powerful, dazzlingly bright lights used in large public spaces, like streets or factories, but they were far too intense, too dangerous, and too impractical for lighting individual rooms or homes. The world desperately needed a safe, steady, easily controllable source of electric light. And according to the widely accepted story you've grown up with, Thomas Edison decided he was the man to deliver it. He threw the full weight of his invention factory at the problem. The narrative goes that Edison, with his characteristic determination and relentless work ethic, declared he would find a solution. He understood it wasn't just about making a wire glow. It was about finding a material that could glow brightly without quickly burning up, enclosed in a bulb with as much air removed as possible, a vacuum, and powered by a reliable, scalable electrical system. The focus quickly narrowed onto the glowing part, the filament. The story becomes one of epic trial and error. You imagine Edison and his team, day after day, week after week, trying different materials. They tested metals like platinum, which could withstand high temperatures, but were expensive. They tried countless natural materials. The legend emphasizes Edison's almost superhuman persistence. You hear the quotes, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." While the exact number might be apocryphal, historians still argue whether the 10,000 experiments figure is literally accurate or a piece of later myth-making. It perfectly captures the spirit of the narrative. An inventor who simply refused to give up in the face of countless setbacks. You can almost feel the frustration in the lab. Experiment after experiment, the delicate filaments would burn out in seconds or minutes. Too hot, wrong material, imperfect vacuum. The air inside the bulb, even a tiny amount, would cause the hot filament to oxidize and disintegrate. They needed something that could get incandescently hot, but was also durable and wouldn't react with the residual gases in the bulb. Then the story reaches its climax, usually around the fall of 1879. The breakthrough. The team tried carbonizing everyday materials, and finally they hit upon it, a simple piece of carbonized cotton sewing thread. You picture the moment. The thread carefully placed inside the evacuated glass bulb. The current switched on, and a steady, warm, beautiful light fills the room, burning not for minutes, but for hours. The first successful, long-lasting incandescent light bulb. It burned for over 13 hours, a monumental leap forward. Later, Edison and his team found that carbonized bamboo fibers worked even better, providing a filament that could last for hundreds of hours. There's a quirky tidbit for you. Who knew bamboo could light up your life? This discovery, this successful demonstration of a practical, long-lasting incandescent bulb is presented as the moment electric light was truly invented. Edison quickly secured U.S. patents for his design, a mainstream historical fact reinforcing his claim, and the news spread like wildfire. Public demonstrations followed dazzling crowds, and proving that the age of dirty, dangerous gaslight was drawing to a close. Edison, the relentless experimenter, the leader of the Menlo Park factory, had conquered the challenge. He wasn't just an inventor. He was a visionary who had brought light into the world, forever changing the way we live. This is the powerful, simplified narrative that became etched into textbooks and public consciousness. It's a story of singular genius, hard work, and ultimate triumph. It's compelling, easy to understand, and paints a clear picture of a hero inventor. But even as you bask in the glow of this well-loved story, a small voice in the back of your mind, perhaps sparked by the hints from our earlier chat, might whisper, was it really that simple? Was he truly the only one? Because while this narrative is powerful and widely believed, it doesn't quite tell the whole story. It's a carefully curated version, focusing the spotlight intensely on one man, sometimes dimming the contributions of others who were also working in parallel, making similar discoveries, and even in some cases getting there first. Okay, you've heard the story of Edison and his 10,000 attempts, the carbonized cotton thread, the dramatic reveal at Menlo Park. It's a classic tale of perseverance and triumph, and it's firmly lodged in the public consciousness. But remember that tangled ball of yarn we talked about? Now it's time to pull on another thread, one that complicates the picture considerably. Because while Edison was leading his team in New Jersey across the Atlantic, in gloomy, perhaps slightly damp England, another brilliant mind was also wrestling with the exact same problem: how to make a durable, practical electric light glow inside a glass bulb. Enter Joseph Swan. You might not know his name as readily as Edison's, and that right there tells you a lot about the power of narrative and public image. Swan was a respected physicist and chemist from Newcastle upon Tyne. He wasn't operating a sprawling invention factory like Menlo Park. His work was perhaps more in the traditional vein of a dedicated scientist-inventor, funded by his own means and supported by a smaller team. But his dedication to the challenge of incandescent light was long-standing. In fact, Swan had been thinking about and experimenting with incandescent lighting designs for decades, stretching back to the 1850s. That's right, decades before Edison's famous 1879 breakthrough. He demonstrated early versions of a carbon filament lamp as far back as 1860, a mainstream historical fact showing the long timeline of this invention. Though these early attempts weren't commercially viable due to issues with the vacuum technology available at the time and the short lifespan of the filaments. Think about Swan plugging away in his lab during those years. The challenge was immense. How do you get a material hot enough to glow brightly without melting or burning up instantly? And how do you remove enough air from the bulb to prevent that glowing material from oxidizing? It required not just finding the right filament, but also perfecting the glass blowing and vacuum pump technologies of the era. It was a multifaceted problem that stumped many brilliant people for years. By the late 1870s, as vacuum pump technology improved, Swan was making significant progress. He was experimenting with different forms of carbon, including carbonized paper and cotton threads, just like Edison. He discovered that a thin, high-resistance carbon filament in a vacuum was the key to creating a bulb that could burn for a reasonable amount of time using a manageable amount of electricity. You picture him, perhaps less showman-like than Edison, more focused on the scientific principles, meticulously refining his design. And refine it, he did. By December 1878, a full year before Edison's highly publicized demonstration at Menlo Park, Joseph Swan gave public demonstrations of his own working incandescent light bulb in Gateshead, England, another mainstream historical fact. His bulbs used a carbon filament made from cotton thread housed in an evacuated glass bulb, and they worked. They produced a steady, usable light. He continued to improve his design over the next year, securing British patents for his incandescent lamp in 1880. So while the story most of us know features Edison triumphantly unveiling his light bulb in 1879, the reality is that Joseph Swan had not only been working on the concept for much longer, but had also achieved a practical working version and demonstrated it publicly before Edison's famous reveal. This isn't some obscure, forgotten inventor. Swan was a recognized scientist in Britain, and his work was known. A quirky tidbit about Swan: his early work on photography and the dry plate process actually contributed indirectly to his lighting research. His experience with chemicals and creating vacuums for photographic plates gave him valuable knowledge that he applied to the challenge of the light bulb. It just goes to show how interconnected scientific pursuits can be. Now, this is where historians still argue whether Edison and Swan truly developed their successful bulbs completely independently, or if news of each other's progress, perhaps through scientific journals or word of mouth. Remember, the transatlantic cable existed by this time. A mainstream fact enabling faster communication played any role in spurring on their own efforts or refining their approaches. Did they race neck and neck in isolation? Or were they glancing over the fence at each other's progress? It's hard to say definitively, but the striking similarity in their final designs and the timing of their public successes certainly fuels the debate. What is clear is that Joseph Swan was not a later imitator. He was a dedicated pioneer who arrived at a very similar solution through his own rigorous work at almost the exact same historical moment, if not slightly earlier, in terms of public demonstration. Okay, so, now that while Edison was busy constructing his legend in Menlo Park, Joseph Swan across the pond wasn't exactly twiddling his thumbs. They were both independently chasing the same elusive goal, a practical, long-lasting, incandescent electric light bulb. And while the public narrative crowned Edison, the technical reality is that they were wrestling with identical thorny problems, using surprisingly similar methods, arriving at strikingly similar solutions almost simultaneously. It's like two people on opposite sides of the planet trying to invent sliced bread without knowing the other exists. And they both independently think, you know what? Cutting it into thin uniform pieces seems like a good idea. The core challenges were formidable for both inventors. First, the filament. What material could you heat to incandescence? That is, make it glow brightly like the sun, without it melting, evaporating, or simply bursting into flames. They tried everything from precious metals like platinum, which was expensive, and still had issues, to every imaginable type of carbon. Swan experimented with carbon rods and wires early on, while Edison famously tried Well, reportedly, everything from graphite to compressed lampblack and even hair, as we heard before. But the key breakthrough for both men, achieved around the same time, involved using a thin, high-resistance filament made from carbonized organic material like cotton thread or bamboo. This material glowed brightly when a current passed through it, and crucially had relatively high electrical resistance, which meant it could be powered by lower, safer voltages distributed from a central source, essential for a practical lighting system. Second, the vacuum. This wasn't just about keeping air out so the filament wouldn't burn up instantly. It was also about preventing the filament material from slowly sputtering off and blackening the inside of the bulb over time, which was a major issue in early attempts. Achieving a really good vacuum in the late 1870s was tricky business. The technology was improving, thanks to innovations like the Sprengel pump, a mainstream historical fact. This type of mercury vacuum pump was vital for creating the necessary near-perfect vacuum, but it still required careful technique and skilled glass blowing to create a bulb that was truly evacuated and then perfectly sealed. Both Edison and Swan dedicated significant effort to perfecting this process, understanding that the filament was useless without a bulb that was effectively an empty void. You can picture them in their labs, the rhythmic click-clack of a vacuum pump, the delicate work of sealing the glass bulb without letting any air back in. It required immense patience and precision. A quirky tidbit here, Edison's team eventually found that baking the glass bulbs in an oven while pumping helped drive out residual gases clinging to the glass walls, further improving the vacuum and the bulb's lifespan. It was details like these, born from countless experiments, that turned a scientific curiosity into a practical product. So their final commercially viable designs, developed almost concurrently, were remarkably similar: a thin carbonized filament inside a highly evacuated glass bulb, fitted into some form of base that allowed electrical current to pass through to the filament. Swan's initial successful filament was carbonized cotton, while Edison landed on carbonized bamboo as his preferred material for a time because of its long fibers and durability. Imagine a future where houses were literally lit by processed plants. Kinda cool, right? But the fundamental principles and the resulting light were essentially the same. This is where historians still argue about whose bulb design, in its initial commercially produced form, was technically superior or more ready for mass production. Did Swan's methods produce a more consistent filament? Was Edison's entire system design, including generators, wiring, and sockets, the real game changer, making his slightly later bulb the more practical solution, even if Swan's bulb was developed first? It's not just about inventing the thing. It's about inventing the whole package that makes it usable. What's undeniable is that both men, working independently with the available technology and scientific understanding of the time, converged on the same fundamental approach to solving the incandescent light problem. They both understood the critical roles of the high-resistance filament and the near-perfect vacuum. They both iterated through countless materials and techniques. The fact that they arrived at such similar endpoints highlights the scientific and engineering logic inherent in the problem itself. It wasn't a solution pulled from nowhere. It was the result of applying known principles and persistent experimentation. And because their inventions were so similar, and the potential market so enormous, their parallel paths were destined to collide not in a friendly scientific conference, but in the far less amicable arena of patent law and business competition. You've seen how both Edison and Swan, separated by an ocean, but united by a formidable technical challenge, independently developed remarkably similar solutions to the problem of incandescent lighting. They both landed on the idea of a thin carbon filament glowing in a near-perfect vacuum inside a sealed glass bulb. It's almost uncanny, isn't it? Like discovering two different teams on a treasure hunt, given the same map, independently dug in the exact same spot, and found a chest overflowing with the future of artificial light. But finding the treasure is one thing. Claiming legal ownership of it is quite another. And with a prize as valuable as practical electric light, the stage was set for a different kind of battle. One fought not with wires and vacuum pumps, but with lawyers and patent documents. Patents, you see, are essentially a legal contract. In exchange for publicly disclosing how your invention works, the government grants you exclusive rights to make use and sell that invention for a limited time. It's meant to encourage innovation by allowing inventors to profit from their work. But what happens when two people invent the same thing around the same time? Chaos, that's what happens. Or more accurately, lawsuits. Edison, the businessman, and acutely aware of the need to protect his investments and innovations, was quick to file patent applications in the United States. His most famous incandescent light patent, U.S. Patent 223-898, was filed in November 1879, shortly after his triumphant public demonstration, and granted in January 1880. That's your mainstream historical fact, a key patent number and date in the story. This patent broadly claimed the key elements: a carbon filament with high resistance enclosed in an evacuated glass globe. It was a powerful legal weapon in the American market. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Joseph Swan was also busy securing his legal rights. Having publicly demonstrated his working bulb in December 1878 and refined it throughout 1879, he began filing for patents in Britain, starting in 1880, another mainstream historical fact establishing his legal moves. His British patents covered similar ground: the use of carbon filaments, often specifically mentioning carbonized cotton or paper in an evacuated bulb. Now look at the timeline again. Swan's public demonstrations happened before Edison's most famous one. Edison's crucial U.S. patent was filed shortly after his demonstration and granted quickly. Swan's British patents followed his demonstrations. This geographical and chronological tangle meant that while Edison held strong patent protection in the U.S., Swan held the cards in the U.K. Their claims overlapped significantly in terms of the core technology, but the legal rights were split along national lines. This created a fascinating predicament. Who was the true inventor? The one who demonstrated first, the one who filed their patent first, regardless of when the invention was actually completed. The one whose patent was granted first. Patent law has complex rules about priority, often looking at the date of invention and the date of filing. But proving who invented exactly what and exactly when is incredibly difficult, especially when research was happening independently and documentation might be patchy or contested. You can almost feel the legal storm gathering on the horizon, can't you? Billable hours mounting, even before the concept of billable hours really took off. A quirky tidbit about patents of this era: the patent office sometimes struggled to keep up with the rapid pace of invention, leading to overlapping claims and lengthy examination processes. The language used in patents could also be incredibly precise and narrow, or sometimes deliberately broad and vague, leading to endless arguments about what was truly covered. Historians still argue about the validity and breadth of some of these early incandescent lamp patents, debating whether they truly protected the fundamental idea or just specific implementations of it, and whether the patent offices of the time were equipped to handle such complex overlapping claims fairly. The stakes were incredibly high. The inventor, who controlled the fundamental patents in a major market like the United States or Great Britain, stood to gain immense power and wealth. It wasn't just about selling bulbs. It was about controlling the entire infrastructure. The generators, the wiring, the sockets, everything needed to bring electric light to homes and businesses. Edison and Swan, despite their shared technical achievements, were now rivals in a high-stakes legal and commercial game, each armed with national patents that asserted their claim to the invention of practical electric light. Their parallel paths had converged, and the clash was inevitable. You're probably starting to see the picture isn't quite as neat as the one painted by the simple Edison invented the light bulb narrative. With both Edison in the US and Swan in the UK developing highly similar incandescent lamps using carbon filaments in a vacuum around the same time, and both securing national patents for their work, a clash was absolutely inevitable. It was like two prospectors striking gold in adjacent claims. Who gets the bigger share? The answer wasn't going to be decided in the lab, but in the courtroom. The period that followed was marked by intense legal battles. Edison's U.S. company, backed by investors eager to capitalize on the burgeoning electric light market, vigorously defended its patents, suing rival companies they accused of infringement. In Britain, Swan's company found itself in a similar position, defending its own patents and challenging others. You can imagine the stuffy courtrooms, filled with lawyers, experts arguing over technical details of filament preparation and vacuum levels. Judges trying to make sense of complex scientific concepts and sometimes conflicting claims of prior invention. It was a patent war, plain and simple, fought with paper and ink rather than cannons and ships, but with potentially world-altering consequences for the control of a revolutionary technology. These lawsuits were incredibly costly and time-consuming. They tied up resources, created uncertainty for investors, and perhaps most importantly, distracted both sides from the real work of developing the technology further and crucially expanding the market for electric light. Remember, gaslight was still the dominant form of illumination. The biggest competitor wasn't Swan for Edison or Edison for Swan. It was the established infrastructure of gas companies. Fighting each other, tooth and nail, was actually hindering the broader adoption of electric light. It was like two ice cream vendors fighting over the corner spot, while ignoring the fact that everyone on the street prefers hot dogs. Slowly, pragmatism began to dawn on the businessmen funding these ventures. Why spend a fortune fighting in court when you could potentially combine forces and dominate the market together? The shared technology was undeniable. The patents in their respective countries were strong deterrents to others, but also barriers to each other's expansion. An alliance began to seem more appealing than annihilation. Negotiations started. It wasn't likely a quick or easy process. Patents were valuable assets, and pride was undoubtedly involved. But eventually the business logic prevailed. In 1883, a landmark agreement was reached in Britain, the formation of the Edison and Swan United Electric Light Company Limited, quickly nicknamed Ediswan. That's your mainstream historical fact. The birth of a major early electric company. This company merged the patent rights and business interests of both the Edison and Swan companies in the United Kingdom. What did this mean? Instead of suing each other, they pooled their resources. Swan brought his earlier demonstrations and British patent strength. Edison brought his systematic manufacturing techniques, his name recognition, which was growing even in Britain, and potentially refinements from his Menlo Park lab. Edison now held a formidable patent portfolio in the UK, making it much harder for competitors to enter the market. They could focus on building factories, installing lighting systems, and convincing people to switch from gas to electricity. It was a strategic move that benefited both parties by ending the costly legal feuding and creating a dominant player in the British market. A quirky tidbit from this era: one of the specific points of contention in the legal battles often came down to the exact method used to create the vacuum and seal the bulb. Lawyers would dissect the patent claims looking for tiny technical differences that might allow one patent to be deemed non-infringing on the other. It highlights just how much the success of the bulb depended on mastering not just the filament, but the seemingly mundane act of getting air out of a glass container. Historians still argue whether the formation of Edison was a truly equal partnership, recognizing Swan's pioneering work, or if it was primarily a way for Edison's powerful global network to absorb a significant competitor in a key market, effectively legitimizing Edison's claims while sidelining Swan's independent contributions in the popular memory. The formation of Edison wasn't the end of patent battles for Edison globally, but it was a significant resolution to the most direct conflict arising from the parallel invention of the incandescent bulb with Joseph Swan. It shows that the path of innovation isn't always a solo sprint. Sometimes it involves parallel development, fierce competition, and eventually pragmatic collaboration, forged in the fires of legal disputes. The invention of the light bulb wasn't a single event by a single person. It was a process involving multiple brilliant minds, intense competition, and complex business maneuvers. So you've navigated the tangled tale of the light bulb, the parallel inventions, the patent wars, the uneasy alliance of Edison. It's a far cry from the simple story you might have learned, but it's crucial to remember that by the time the incandescent light bulb became his major focus, Thomas Edison wasn't just some unknown tinkerer hoping for a lucky break. He had already built a solid reputation and, more importantly, accumulated significant wealth from a series of genuinely groundbreaking and less controversial inventions that often get overshadowed by the glow of the bulb. Cast your mind back past the Menlo Park invention factory to Edison's younger days. Remember how he started out as a telegraph operator callback. This wasn't just a job. It was his immersion into the cutting-edge communication technology of the era. He spent hours sending and receiving messages over wires, learning the technology inside and out, and perhaps more importantly, seeing its limitations and opportunities for improvement firsthand. His early inventions sprang directly from this experience. He wasn't content just operating the existing equipment. He wanted to make it better, faster, more efficient. One of his earliest significant inventions was an improved stock ticker, a mainstream historical fact. This was a device that printed stock prices transmitted over telegraph lines. In a story that's become part of the Edison legend, though perhaps polished over time, he improved a chaotic existing system. And when the company asked him how much he wanted for it, he was nervous and planned to ask for $5,000. To his astonishment, they offered him $40,000, a fortune at the time. This sudden influx of cash provided the capital he needed to set up his own workshops and laboratories, eventually leading to Menlo Park. The stock ticker wasn't just a clever gadget. It was the financial bedrock upon which his later, more famous ventures were built. But his most technically impressive early achievement in telegraphy was arguably the quadruplex telegraph, another mainstream historical fact, invented in 1874. Prior to this, a single telegraph wire could only send one message at a time in one direction. Then came duplex telegraphy, allowing two messages simultaneously, one in each direction. Edison's quadruplex system was revolutionary. It allowed sending four messages simultaneously over a single wire, two in each direction. Think about the impact of that. It quadrupled the capacity of existing telegraph lines without having to build expensive new infrastructure. It was a complex feat of electrical engineering, relying on subtle variations in current strength and polarity, and it earned him significant recognition and royalties from Western Union, the dominant telegraph company in the U.S. These weren't simple inventions. They required a deep understanding of electricity circuits and the practical needs of the rapidly expanding communication industry. They demonstrate a side of Edison that was a master of electrical engineering and system optimization. You can imagine him hunched over his workbench, meticulously wiring circuits, testing relays, trying to squeeze more capacity out of those thin copper wires spanning the continent. A quirky tidbit from his telegraph days involves an early invention that never quite took off: an automatic vote recorder designed for legislatures. He thought it would speed up the voting process, but politicians liked the slow process. It gave them time to lobby and change votes. His first patented invention was a commercial flop, a lesson he took to heart, vowing only to invent things he believed there was a demand for. Historians still argue whether these complex, industrial-focused inventions, like the quadruplex telegraph, truly showcase the peak of Edison's inventive genius, requiring a deep theoretical understanding alongside practical skill compared to the later, more consumer-facing products, like the phonograph or light bulb, which perhaps relied more on iterative experimentation and market sensing. These early triumphs in telegraphy are crucial to understanding Edison's rise. They weren't as romantic as bringing light into darkness or capturing sound, but they were solid, valuable contributions that solved real-world problems for major industries. They proved he was a capable, innovative inventor, with a knack for both technical problem-solving and identifying profitable opportunities. This success is what allowed him to build Menlo Park in the first place, attracting both talent and investment, setting the stage for the later inventions that would make him a household name, even if the stories behind those later inventions are a bit more illuminated by controversy. Okay, leaving the complex dance of patent lawyers and carbon filaments behind for a moment, let's turn to another corner of Thomas Edison's prolific mind, one that produced an invention so unexpected, so utterly novel, it seemed like something out of science fiction at the time. Forget lighting the world. Now we're talking about capturing sounds right out of the air and playing them back whenever you please. We're talking about the phonograph. Imagine you're in the Menlo Park lab again, but instead of focusing on glowing wires, you're thinking about vibrations. Edison and his team were working on improving the telegraph and the newly invented telephone. They were trying to find a way to record telegraph messages automatically using an electromagnet to make indentations on a paper disc that could then be read back later. It was a clever idea, rooted in his telegraph experience callback. But one day, while experimenting with this, Edison had a flash of insight. What if those vibrations weren't just from the clicks and dots of a telegraph, but from something else. What if they were from sound itself? The story goes, and it's one of the most famous in invention history, that Edison quickly sketched a design and handed it to his skilled mechanic John Crucy with a note that supposedly said something like, "Build this." The device was simple, almost crude: a brass cylinder with a spiral groove cut into its surface, a crank to rotate it, a diaphragm, a thin membrane with a needle attached that rested in the groove, and a mouthpiece to speak into. Crucy built it, likely thinking his boss was a bit mad. Then in December 1877, a mainstream historical fact, the year the phonograph was invented, they were ready to test it. Edison reportedly shouted into the mouthpiece the nursery rhyme, "Mary had a little lamb." The needle vibrating from his voice made indentations in a sheet of tinfoil wrapped around the cylinder. Then he moved the needle back to the start and cranked the cylinder again. To his astonishment, and likely everyone else's in the room, the machine spoke back. A recognizable, albeit scratchy and faint rendition of "Mary had a little lamb" emerged from the diaphragm. You can only imagine the sheer disbelief, the wonder of that moment. Sound something ephemeral, transient, gone, the instant it was uttered, had been captured, frozen in time, on a thin sheet of metal, and could be played back on demand. It was like magic. The press dubbed it the talking machine, and the public was utterly captivated. Edison became known, overnight, not just for tinkering with telegraphs, but as a true wizard, someone who could bottle sound itself. The basic principle was elegantly simple, yet revolutionary. Sound waves cause a diaphragm to vibrate. A stylus attached to the diaphragm translates these vibrations into physical indentations or grooves on a recording medium. Initially tinfoil, later wax cylinders and discs that is moving beneath it. To play it back, you simply run a needle attached to a diaphragm over the indentations, and the needle is vibrated by the grooves, causing the diaphragm to recreate the original sounds. It was analog recording in its most fundamental form. Interestingly, Edison didn't initially envision the phonograph primarily as a device for recording music or entertainment, which is how we think of sound recording today. His early list of potential uses included dictation, a phonographic letter, recording messages for telephone calls, recording books for the blind, talking books, capturing the last words of dying people, and even teaching elocution. There's your quirky tidbit. Imagine learning to speak properly from a scratchy tinfoil recording. The idea of recording performances for mass sale came later, driven partly by others and partly by the technology's limitations and potential. The first tinfoil phonographs were more proof-of-concept novelties than practical machines. The sound quality was poor, the tinfoil wore out quickly, and recordings couldn't be easily duplicated. It was an astonishing invention, but it needed significant development to become a commercially viable product beyond a demonstration curiosity. Edison himself set the phonograph aside for a few years after its initial sensation to focus on the light bulb, a project he saw as having more immediate commercial potential. This pause allowed others like Chichester Bell and Charles Tainter, with their graphophone using wax cylinders, to make significant improvements, which would later lead to more patent battles and collaborations for Edison. Historians still argue whether the invention of the phonograph was a more singular, pure moment of genius for Edison compared to the light bulb, where others were clearly working on similar ideas. Was it his most truly original concept? Or was its initial impact overshadowed by the light bulb's more immediate and widespread societal transformation. Regardless of where it ranks, the phonograph was a dazzling demonstration of Edison's inventive reach, a device that fundamentally changed how humanity interacted with sound and laid the groundwork for the entire audio recording industry. So, you've explored the light bulb saga, touched upon the financial successes of telegraphy improvements, and marveled at the seemingly magical phonograph. But Edison's relentless drive to record and reproduce reality didn't stop with sound. His gaze, or rather the gaze of his Menlo Park and later West Orange team, turned towards capturing not just voices, but sight itself in motion. The pursuit of moving pictures was another frontier. And Edison, or at least his organization, was determined to conquer it. The idea of creating the illusion of movement from a series of still images wasn't entirely new. Toys like the zoetrope had played with the concept for decades, showing how rapidly flipping through pictures could fool the eye into seeing motion. But capturing real-world action and playing it back, that was the challenge. Edison saw it as a logical extension of his work on the phonograph. If you could record and reproduce sound, why not record and reproduce visual events? He reportedly envisioned a device that would do for the eye what the phonograph did for the ear, potentially even combining the two. As with many of his major projects, this wasn't a solo endeavor for Edison. He set his team to work on the problem, providing the resources and the overall goal. The key figure leading this charge was William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, a brilliant inventor and photographer in Edison's employ. While Edison provided the vision and the funding, historians widely credit Dixon with doing most of the heavy lifting in developing the actual technology, the camera, to capture the images and the device to view them. This again underscores the invention factory model callback, a leader directing the efforts of skilled specialists. The result of their efforts was the kinetograph, the camera that recorded the motion, and the kinetoscope, the machine designed for viewing. The kinetograph was a marvel of early engineering, capable of pulling celluloid film, a relatively new and flexible material essential for capturing sequential images rapidly. Past a lens at a consistent speed, taking dozens of pictures per second. You can imagine the complex gears and mechanisms inside Precision Tune to capture those fleeting moments. The kinetoscope. A mainstream historical fact, commercially introduced around 1894, was the viewing device. But here's where it differs significantly from the cinema experience you know. The kinetoscope was a large coin-operated cabinet. You'd peer through a small window on top, and inside, a loop of film would run continuously illuminated by a light bulb, creating the illusion of movement. It was a personal peep show experience, not a projected one for a large audience. Edison initially believed this was the more commercially viable approach. Individual machines and parlors, like jukeboxes, for the eyes generating revenue per view. To produce films for the kinetoscope, Edison built one of the world's first film studios. They called it the Black Maria, a mainstream historical fact. After police patrol wagons, it supposedly resembled a simple tar paper-covered shack built on a poverty rotating platform at his West Orange, New Jersey laboratory complex. A quirky tidbit, the whole building could be rotated on a track to follow the sun across the sky, maximizing the natural light needed for filming with the slow film stocks available at the time. Inside, they filmed short, simple subjects, acrobats, dancers, snippets of plays, boxing cats, and even staged scenes designed purely to showcase the novelty of moving pictures. The kinetoscope parlors were an immediate sensation. People lined up, dropped in their coins, and marveled at the sight of movement captured on film. It was astonishing, captivating proof that this new technology worked, but the format had its limitations. The films were very short, often less than a minute long, and the individual viewing experience meant it wasn't scalable to large audiences in the way that projection would be. Edison did experiment with synchronizing the kinetoscope with the phonograph to create talking pictures, the kinetophone, but the technology was crude, and synchronization was a persistent problem for decades. Historians still argue about Edison's personal role in the technical development of the kinetograph and kinetoscope. Was he the driving force directing every step, or was he more of a visionary backer and patent holder, with Dixon doing the actual inventing? It's clear Dixon played a pivotal role, leading some to argue that he deserves more credit than he often receives in the popular narrative. They also debate whether Edison's initial focus on the peep show format, while profitable in the short term, actually hindered the development of projected cinema in the United States, leaving the door open for European inventors like the Lumiere brothers to pioneer projection technology. Regardless, the kinetoscope was a vital step, one of the very first commercially successful systems for capturing and displaying motion, and it undeniably laid some of the crucial groundwork for the future of film. You've seen how Thomas Edison tackled illumination, captured sound, and brought moving pictures to life. Now let's delve into a project that was perhaps less glamorous, less instantly sensational than a talking machine or a glowing bulb, but one that consumed an enormous amount of his time, resources, and legendary persistence: the quest for a better battery. Because generating electricity is one thing, but storing it efficiently and reliably, that was and still is a major challenge. In the early days of electricity, primary batteries, like the ones in your remote control that you throw away when they die, were common, but they couldn't be recharged. Rechargeable batteries existed primarily the lead-acid type, similar in principle to the one in your car today, but they were heavy, bulky, used corrosive acid that was prone to spilling and weren't particularly durable, especially under heavy use or vibration. Edison saw a huge potential market for a rugged, lighter, more reliable, rechargeable battery. He envisioned it powering everything from mining lamps to electric vehicles and portable devices. This wasn't a quick project, like sketching the phonograph. The development of the Edison alkaline storage battery, primarily the nickel-iron type, that's your mainstream historical fact. The core chemistry he pursued was an absolute marathon. He started serious work on it in the late 1890s, and it would consume his efforts for over a decade. He famously said it took him more inventive work than the phonograph and light bulb combined. Think about that for a second. The man who supposedly tried 10,000 filaments found batteries even harder to crack. That tells you something about the complexity of electrochemistry. You can picture the scene in his West Orange labs, his main research facility after Menlo Park. It was a dedicated grinding effort, experiment after experiment, trying countless combinations of metals, electrolytes, and cell designs, testing materials for durability, capacity, voltage consistency, and charge-discharge cycles. He and his team systematically explored thousands upon thousands of potential materials and configurations. This wasn't a sudden spark of genius. It was the epitome of his 99% perspiration philosophy taken to an extreme. There were setbacks galore. Promising prototypes failed after a few charge cycles. Materials corroded unexpectedly. Performance wasn't consistent. Early versions had a terrible memory effect, losing capacity. If not fully discharged a problem he had to work hard to overcome. A quirky tidbit about the struggle legend has it that after years of work and thousands of failed experiments, Edison kicked over a bench full of battery components in frustration, only to return later calm and tell his team, "Well, we know that doesn't work." It might be apocryphal, but it captures the sheer difficulty and his persistent, if occasionally explosive nature. Despite the monumental challenges and frustrations, Edison eventually succeeded in developing a commercially viable nickel-iron alkaline storage battery, receiving key patents in the early 1900s, another mainstream historical fact. The time frame of its introduction. His battery used electrodes made of nickel hydroxide and iron oxide in an alkaline electrolyte, typically potassium hydroxide. It was more robust than lead-acid batteries, less prone to corrosion, and could withstand more charge-discharge cycles, making it particularly well-suited for applications involving rough handling or frequent charging. These batteries found significant use in various fields. They powered the lamps worn by miners, offering a safer and more reliable light source than flame-based lamps, a key application. They were used in electric vehicles, which were surprisingly popular for a time in the early 20th century before gasoline engines fully dominated. They powered railway signals, forklift trucks, and provided backup power in buildings. Historians still argue whether the sheer scale of the effort and investment Edison poured into the alkaline battery project ultimately paid off commercially relative to his other ventures, or if its impact, while significant in specific industrial niches, was ultimately less transformative globally than the light bulb or phonograph, particularly as the lead-acid battery improved and became standard for automobile starting. Regardless, the development of the alkaline battery was a testament to Edison's unwavering determination and the power of his organized research model, showcasing his willingness to tackle incredibly difficult technical problems, even when the path to a solution was long, arduous, and filled with failure. It's a less celebrated invention, perhaps, but a crucial one in the story of portable power. You've explored Edison's major hits, the light bulb, with all its complexities, the seemingly magical phonograph, the pioneering kinetoscope, and the stubbornly difficult battery. It's a string of impressive world-changing inventions that would solidify anyone's place in history. But to truly understand the reality behind the Wizard of Menlo Park moniker, you also have to look at the projects that didn't quite work out, the ventures that consumed vast amounts of time and money only to fizzle, the ideas that were ahead of their time or simply just didn't pan out. Even for a prolific inventor like Edison, failure wasn't just a stepping stone. Sometimes it was a dead end. Remember his famous quote about finding 10,000 ways that won't work. While often applied to the light bulb filament search, that philosophy was tested on many projects that never reached the same level of success, or any success at all. It turns out that even boundless energy, a brilliant team, and significant resources can't guarantee a breakthrough. One of Edison's most significant and costly failures was his magnetic ore separation venture, a mainstream historical fact, a massive project he poured resources into in the 1890s. Seeing that high-grade iron ore deposits were being depleted, Edison had the idea to use powerful electromagnets to extract iron particles from low-grade ore, or even just iron-bearing sand. He bought land, built a massive plant in northern New Jersey, and developed complex machinery for crushing rock and running it past magnets. He envisioned this as a way to create a cheap source of iron for steel production. You can picture the scene: huge crushers, conveyor belts, powerful magnets humming, separating black sand from other rock. It was an ambitious engineering project, but he ran into numerous technical problems. The machinery was difficult to maintain. The process wasn't as efficient as hoped, and dealing with the sheer volume of low-grade material was a logistical nightmare. The truly fatal blow, however, was market timing. While he was pouring millions into this project, massive new deposits of high-grade iron ore were discovered in the Mesabi Range in Minnesota, making his costly, complex process for low-grade ore economically unviable overnight. It was a brutal lesson in market realities and geological luck. The magnetic ore separation plant was eventually shut down, a monument to a well-intentioned but ultimately failed enterprise. Another area Edison became fixated on was concrete. He believed concrete could be used for almost anything and envisioned mass-produced, affordable concrete houses that could be built quickly. He even experimented with making concrete furniture pianos and refrigerators. There's your quirky tidbit. Imagine lugging a solid concrete armchair. While concrete construction eventually became widespread, his specific methods and the idea of poured concrete houses as a mass solution didn't gain widespread traction at the time, partly due to technical issues, partly due to the public's perception of concrete as a cold, unappealing material for homes compared to wood. Then there were attempts to improve or extend existing inventions that didn't catch on. His kinetophone, the attempt to synchronize his kinetoscope moving pictures with his phonograph audio, never worked well enough to be commercially successful due to the technical difficulties of synchronization, a problem that plagued the film industry for decades. Later in his life, he spent years trying to find a domestic source of rubber, experimenting with various plants like goldenrod, another mainstream historical fact, a project driven by concerns about rubber supply during wartime, but this never developed into a major commercial success compared to natural rubber sources. These failures weren't just minor hiccups. Some, like the ore separation, were huge drains on his resources and reputation. They show that his intuition wasn't always perfect. His engineering solutions weren't always successful in practice, and sometimes external factors, like new discoveries or market shifts, could derail even the most ambitious plans. Historians still argue whether these significant failures highlight limitations in Edison's scientific understanding or business judgment, or if they simply underscore the inherent risk and unpredictability of radical innovation. Was he too stubborn in pursuing certain ideas, or was he simply demonstrating the necessary willingness to take big swings, knowing that some would inevitably miss? Regardless, acknowledging these less successful ventures provides a more complete, more human picture of Edison than the narrative that presents him as an infallible inventor whose every idea turned into a triumph. He pursued countless ideas, celebrated the successes, and undoubtedly learned from the failures, even the expensive ones. You've journeyed through the complex technical challenges Edison faced, the legal battles he fought, and even the projects that ended up gathering dust. Now let's turn to perhaps one of his most enduring, and arguably one of his greatest inventions. Although it wasn't made of wires or chemicals, the public image of Thomas Edison himself. Because while his inventions were undeniably significant, the reason his name is synonymous with invention in a way that Joseph Swan's or even Nikola Tesla's isn't, has a lot to do with a very deliberate, very savvy campaign to control the narrative. Edison wasn't just an inventor. He was a master of public relations long before the term even existed. From relatively early in his career, Edison understood the power of the press. He knew that getting his work covered in newspapers wasn't just good for business. It built his reputation, attracted investors, and created a sense of excitement and anticipation around his next project. He learned how to interact with reporters, how to present his work in a compelling way, and how to ensure that the story that reached the public was the one he wanted them to hear. Menlo Park. His invention factory wasn't just a place of furious experimentation. It was also a carefully managed stage for showcasing progress and, just as importantly, generating buzz. Reporters were frequently invited to visit given tours, often carefully curated to highlight promising developments, while perhaps downplaying setbacks, and fed stories about the relentless work ethic and the impending breakthroughs happening within those walls. You can almost see the journalists arriving by train from New York City, pencils and notebooks in hand, eager to get the latest scoop from the wizard. Edison was adept at framing his work in dramatic terms. The search for the light bulb filament, for instance, became an epic quest of thousands of failed experiments, perfectly aligning with the American ideal of rugged individualism and perseverance. While the actual process involved a team and built on decades of prior work, the narrative presented to the public was often simplified to a singular hero battling the problem alone. The discovery of the carbonized filament was presented as a triumphant moment of genius, often without delving into the concurrent work of others like Swan. Remember how the 1879 public demonstration of his light bulb in Menlo Park was a major media event. That's your mainstream historical fact. A prime example of him using a public spectacle to solidify his claim in the public eye. The press, for their part, loved Edison. He was quotable, his work was exciting, and promised a better future, and the narrative of the lone genius was much easier to sell than the complex reality of collaborative research and incremental progress. They dubbed him the Wizard of Menlo Park, a nickname that stuck and further enhanced his mystique. This wasn't just passive reporting. It was an active creation of a public persona amplified by sensational headlines and often unquestioning admiration. You can imagine reading a newspaper account from the time filled with awe at the latest marvel emanating from Edison's supposedly magical laboratory. He knew how to pique interest, often announcing a project or predicting a breakthrough well before it was actually achieved, creating anticipation and keeping his name in the headlines. While this sometimes led to criticism when projects took longer than promised, like the alkaline battery, it generally served him well in maintaining public visibility and the image of a tireless innovator constantly on the verge of the next big thing. A quirky tidbit about his press interactions: Edison was known for being quite direct and sometimes even a bit playful with reporters, which likely endeared him to them and made them more inclined to write favorable stories. He understood that personality mattered in the public eye just as much as patents. Historians still argue about the extent to which Edison's carefully cultivated public image was a genuine reflection of his undeniable talents and drive versus a masterful piece of early marketing that strategically minimized the contributions of others and exaggerated his own unique role. Was he truly a singular wizard, or just incredibly good at making himself seem like one? Regardless of where you land on that debate, it's clear that Edison didn't just invent technologies. He invented the public persona of the modern inventor, setting a standard for how innovation was perceived and marketed that endures to this day. He understood that fame wasn't just a byproduct of success. It was a tool that could be used to fuel further success. You've seen how Edison was quick to harness the power of the press, turning his lab into a news-generating machine. But this wasn't just a phase of youthful media savvy. It evolved into a sophisticated, lifelong campaign to build and maintain his image as the quintessential inventor genius. It became less about simply announcing a new gadget and more about crafting a powerful, enduring myth. Think of it less like advertising a product and more like building a monument in people's minds. As his fame grew, so did the deliberate efforts to control how he was perceived. Public demonstrations of his inventions became carefully staged events, designed not just to show that something worked, but to create a sense of awe and reinforce the wizard image. The opening of the Pearl Street Station in New York City in 1882, which lit up a significant portion of Lower Manhattan with incandescent light. That's your mainstream historical fact. A pivotal moment showcasing his system was a masterclass in this. It wasn't just a technical achievement. It was a powerful public spectacle, demonstrating Edison's ability to literally command the forces of nature to bring light to the darkness. His organization became adept at managing information flow. News about his projects was released strategically, often with great fanfare. Access to Edison himself was controlled, ensuring that when he did interact with the public or the press, it was usually on his terms, reinforcing the image of a tireless, focused genius. The stories that circulated about him, his lack of sleep, his relentless work ethic, his famous quotes about persistence, were constantly reiterated, becoming part of his brand identity. It was like a feedback loop. The press reported the myth, which made the public believe it, which encouraged the press to report it more. Beyond controlling the immediate news cycle, there were deliberate efforts to shape historical memory. Approved biographies were published, often presenting a simplified, heroic version of his life story, emphasizing his struggles and triumphs, while conveniently overlooking inconvenient details like the crucial contributions of his team members or the parallel inventions of others. Call back to sections 2 and 4 to 7. These sanctioned narratives helped solidify the image for future generations, ensuring that the story passed down was one of a lone, heroic figure. It's like they were writing the textbook version of history while it was still happening. The image was one of relentless, almost solitary genius. Think about the countless photographs of Edison you've seen, often posed to look deep in thought, surrounded by scientific equipment, reinforcing the idea of a man constantly communing with the secrets of the universe. A quirky tidbit: many of these photos were carefully staged, sometimes depicting him working late into the night in his lab, even if the actual work involved a large team. He understood the power of iconography and leveraged it effectively. He wasn't just a businessman who happened to invent things. He was Thomas Edison, the embodiment of American ingenuity, a symbol of progress. This image building wasn't just about vanity. It served practical purposes. It attracted investors, boosted sales of his products, and gave him significant cultural authority, allowing him to influence public opinion on matters ranging from technology to business. When Thomas Edison spoke, people listened not just because of his inventions, but because of the powerful, trustworthy persona he had created. Historians still argue about the ethics of this level of image control. Was it a necessary part of promoting revolutionary technology in a rapidly changing world? Or did it unfairly dominate the historical narrative, overshadowing the vital roles played by collaborators, employees, and competing inventors, ultimately distorting our understanding of how innovation actually happens? It's clear that while Edison was undoubtedly a brilliant and driven individual, the wizard persona was a carefully constructed piece of, dare we say, propaganda, designed to elevate one man above the complex, messy, and often collaborative reality of invention. You've traveled through the patents and the labs, the successes and the surprising failures, the dramatic demonstrations, and the quiet, tireless work of a dedicated team. You've seen the carefully crafted image emerge layer by deliberate layer. And as you settle down for the night, letting these stories swirl gently in your mind, you're left with the question, how does history remember Thomas Edison? And how does that memory compare to the more complex reality we've explored together? The answer you see is that the image, the myth of the wizard has been incredibly powerful and persistent. Walk through towns and cities, visit museums, open a textbook, and you'll find his name everywhere. Statues stand in his honor. Schools, companies, even towns bear his name. The sheer scale of patents granted to him, over 1,000 in the United States alone, that's your mainstream historical fact, a number often cited as proof of his prolific genius, is a concrete testament to his inventive output and the legal protection he amassed. He remains, for most people, the embodiment of American innovation. The guy who invented, well, everything important, right? But now, you know the picture isn't quite so simple. You know that the light bulb was also the product of Joseph Swan's parallel genius and a tangle of patent battles that led to an uneasy merger. You know that the invention factory at Menlo Park and later West Orange relied on a dedicated, brilliant team whose contributions were often downplayed in the official narrative callback. You know that alongside the triumphs, like the phonograph and kinetoscope, there were costly failures, like the magnetic ore separator and the stubbornly difficult alkaline battery project callback. And you know, perhaps most significantly, that Edison himself and the powerful organization around him were incredibly adept at cultivating and controlling his public image, ensuring that the story of the lone heroic inventor was the one that stuck. Historians looking back with the benefit of time and access to more complete records have long moved beyond the simplified myth. They see Edison as a pivotal figure, absolutely, but view him through a more nuanced lens. They recognize his genius for identifying market needs, his incredible drive, his organizational skills in setting up large-scale R&D, and his business acumen. But they also acknowledge the collaborative nature of his work, the importance of his team, the simultaneous inventions by others, and the deliberate strategies employed to build his brand. The academic view is less about a singular wizard and more about a complex, brilliant, and sometimes ruthless industrialist and inventor who masterfully navigated the intersection of technology, business, and public perception in a rapidly changing world. You might see a statue of Edison in a town square, a quirky tidbit. They are all over the place, and now perhaps you'll see not just the figure of the inventor, but also a symbol of the powerful forces of myth-making and legacy-building at play. The narrative of the lone genius is simpler, more compelling, easier to teach, and perhaps, frankly, more marketable than the messy, collaborative, legally contested reality. It taps into a desire for heroes, for clear lines of cause and effect, for a single person to credit for the world-altering changes brought about by technology. Historians still argue about how history should ultimately weigh Edison's contributions. Should he be celebrated primarily as an inventor, a businessman, or a master of public relations? And how do his less successful ventures or the controversies surrounding his claims temper the admiration for his genuine successes? There's no single easy answer, just like there was no single easy path to inventing the light bulb or capturing sound. The story of Thomas Edison is a powerful reminder that history is often far more layered and fascinating than the simplified versions we first encounter. It's a story about invention, yes, but also about competition, collaboration, business strategy, legal battles, and the enduring power of narrative. It shows that even the brightest lights in history cast complex shadows, and that understanding the hidden truths behind the myths can give us a richer, more complete picture of the past. And as you lie there now, the sounds of the day fading away, the concepts of filaments and vacuums, patents and phonographs, statues and press clippings beginning to soften at the edges, you can let the details drift, like smoke from an early carbon lamp, or dust motes dancing in the beam of a kinetoscope. The long hours in the lab, the flicker of inspiration, the quiet hum of a machine finally working. It's all part of the story. A tapestry woven from threads of genius hard work and perhaps just a little bit of carefully managed magic. Let the ideas settle like sediment in a battery cell, finding their place in your understanding. The pursuit of light, of sound, of motion, the human drive to invent, to improve, to leave a mark. It's a powerful force, isn't it? A force that shapes the world and the stories we tell about it. You can feel the quiet settling around you. The journey through the myths and hidden truths of Thomas Edison is complete for tonight. Time to rest, to dream, knowing a little more about the light that guides you and the sounds that fill your world. Let your breath deepen, slow, steady, drifting now, drifting. Sweet dreams